sleeping in a tent every night, campfires, ghost stories, s'mores. When they got home, they'd have the usual birthday cake and presents party with their friends, but it wouldn't be nearly as much fun. "Listen for my instructions," said Dad, raising his voice over the rushing water. And then they were in the rapids. It was like being on a wet roller coaster. Water sprayed Oliver's face, getting in his eyes. At least it wasn't salt water. He blinked the water out. "Paddle hard!" Dad shouted over the roar of the river. Oliver held his breath, his grip tightening on the seat. A quick turn, and they narrowly missed a tree branch that jutted into the river. Another quick maneuver, and they navigated between some large rocks, picking up speed as they went. Everyone in the boat was focused. They were almost through the worst of it. It was going to be totally fine. A few more yards, and the canoe jolted as if the Loch Ness Monster had risen beneath it. But it wasn't Nessie. They'd struck a huge rock. The canoe spun. Then it flipped. Oliver had been splashed by the water constantly during this trip, and even sometimes trailed his hand in the river, but he wasn't prepared for how cold it felt to plunge into it. In some places, the Champion River was over his head, and in some places it wasn't. He gripped his life jacket and frantically kicked his feet, hoping to touch the bottom. He couldn't. He was carried off with the current, followed by the overturned canoe. He looked around, trying not to panic. They'd practiced what to do if they capsized, but he couldn't see Trisha or Dad. "Oliver!" Trisha screamed. He still couldn't see her, but her voice came from the other side of the canoe. He grabbed for it and missed. Oliver spat out some water. "I'm okay." Where was Dad? Oliver tried to grab the canoe and missed again. It slid ahead of him, and he saw Trisha desperately holding on to the other side. There was no sign of Dad. They were all wearing bright orange life jackets, but Oliver couldn't see one bobbing in the water around him. Was Dad submerged? Behind them? Dad could be anywhere. How long had it been? 20 seconds? Dad could hold his breath for 20 seconds, no problem. Oliver's shoes scraped along the river bottom. He tried to stop his forward momentum, but the water was still too fast and too deep. Trisha and the canoe were getting farther and farther away. Oliver tried to scream for their father, but got a mouthful of cold water. He coughed and sputtered, then scanned the river again. There! He caught a glimpse of orange in the water. It was about 10 feet behind him. Though Oliver was floating down the middle of the river, Dad, that had to be Dad, was much closer to the edge. Oliver couldn't see the orange anymore. No, there it was. Dad bobbed to the surface. But it wasn't Dad smiling and waving at him. He was face down, letting the river's current carry him along. Oliver swam toward him. He wasn't super athletic, and swimming across the current would be a challenge for anybody, but he had to do this. He felt like his arms were on fire, even in the freezing water, but he pushed harder. He was getting closer. Closer, closer. He grabbed Dad by the vest. Oliver tried to turn him over to get his face out of the water, but it was difficult enough to hold on to him. "Oliver!" He looked over at Trisha. She righted the canoe, ran it up the riverbank, and was holding out her paddle. If he missed it, he and Dad would be swept along the river for who knew how long. Trisha waded into the river, extending the paddle. Clinging to Dad's vest, Oliver reached for it. Got it! He pulled Dad onto his back, but his life jacket was slipping out of Oliver's grasp. He couldn't lose him now. The paddle slipped out of Oliver's numb thumbs, and the two were swept forward. Oliver tried to dig his feet into the dirt and rocks of the riverbed to slow them down. It wasn't working. Oliver didn't give up. He could do this. He knew he could do this. He was not going to let go of Dad. They were not going to be carried down the river to their doom. And then, not too far past Trisha, it started to work. The water was smoother and not as deep. They both slowed, giving Oliver a chance to breathe. He wanted to say something reassuring, but his teeth were chattering too much for him to speak. He dragged Dad to the edge of the river, where Trisha heard...